I always thought I understood the difference between paranoia and intuition. But what happened with Marcus proved I never really knew where that line was. Back then, everything in my life felt eerily symmetrical, like the universe kept placing mirrored versions of things in front of me. Maybe that should have been my first warning. Marcus and I had been together for 3 years, and for the majority of that time he felt like the safest place in the world. He had this calm way about him, this easy charm that made you feel like he could handle anything. I used to joke that being around him lowered my heart rate, but over the last few months, I started noticing shifts so small that at first I convinced myself I imagined them. It started with the way he looked at me. Not a bad look, not a distant one, just studying, like he was comparing me to something only he could see. Sometimes I'd catch him staring, and he would blink and smile like nothing happened. The first time it happened, I brushed it off. The fifth time, I told myself I was being dramatic. The 10th time, I felt something in me tighten because I knew that look meant something. I just didn't know it yet. Then came the bizarre comments. Harmless, confusing, little mismatches in memory that didn't feel like mistakes. He'd say, "You wore that shirt when we went to the fair," even though I'd never owned that shirt before. Or he'd mention a conversation we definitely never had, and each time I'd correct him, he'd laugh it off like I was teasing him. But it wasn't funny to me. It felt like he was remembering a version of me that wasn't real, a version that wasn't me at all. The uneasiness grew worse when strangers started staring at me, not in a creepy way, more like recognition. I'd be standing in line at the grocery store, and someone would smile like they knew me, only to awkwardly apologize when they realized they didn't. At the gym, a woman approached me and said, "Oh, you're back," before realizing her mistake. It kept happening, brief, strange moments that made me feel like I was walking around in someone else's life. But the moment everything cracked was the night Marcus came home smelling like a perfume too soft to be mine. I don't even wear perfume. He claimed it was from a coworker who hugged him after announcing her engagement. And maybe that would have made sense if he didn't look so nervous when he said it. Nervous in that specific way people look when they're praying you won't ask more questions. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling replaying his stammering explanation. The unfamiliar scent, the too long stare he gave me when he thought I wasn't looking. I needed something, anything, to prove to myself that I wasn't losing touch with reality. But the truth I eventually found was so much worse than anything I had imagined. It started unraveling 2 weeks later when he pretended to forget a dinner we had planned. Not just forgot the time, forgot the entire thing. We talked about it 3 times that week. Yet he stood in the doorway, jacket on, acting like I'd invented the whole plan. Something in that moment told me I wasn't dealing with simple forgetfulness. I was dealing with someone who was living 2 separate realities, and only one of them included me. That same week, I noticed him hiding his phone. This was new. Marcus used to leave his phone face up, unlocked, with zero concern. But suddenly he started carrying it everywhere, even into the bathroom. He angled the screen away from me. He turned off previews. He started deleting notifications before I could see them. But the strangest part was what I found when I finally managed to glance over his shoulder as he typed. I didn't see a name I recognized. I saw my own initials, mine, but the message wasn't to me. The sickening confusion that washed over me made my knees feel hollow. Why would he label someone else with my initials? My first thought was that it was an inside joke or a coincidence, but the coil of dread in my stomach knew better. Something about all of this felt twisted, wrong, warped in a way that made me feel like I was being replaced in my own life. I needed answers, and I knew I wouldn't get them by asking him directly. Every time I questioned him about anything lately, he turned it round on me, calling me stressed, overwhelmed, imaginative. So instead, I started watching patterns, excuses, repeated stories, new habits. And that was when I saw at the message preview he forgot to hide while stepping out of the car one night. Just 3 words, but they were enough to make my entire body go cold. I saw her. That was it. Short, cryptic, terrifying. And Marcus replied. She didn't notice. I stared at the screen long enough that I barely heard him coming around the car. I jumped like I'd been burned and pretended I'd dropped my keys on the floor mat. But inside, my pulse was slamming so hard I thought I might faint. She didn't notice. Notice what? Who? Notice who saw me. And why did it matter? That night I lay awake until dawn, replaying every moment of the last few months. The people who thought they recognized me, the phantom memories Marcus swore were mine, the way he stared at me like he was looking for flaws in a copy. I didn't know how yet, but I could feel the truth getting closer, circling me like a storm. And deep down, beneath the fear and confusion, something colder began to grow because I had the sinking feeling that Marcus wasn't cheating with just anyone. He was cheating with someone who looked exactly like me. And whoever she wasn't a coincidence. I became obsessed with the idea that someone out there was walking around with my face. It sounded ridiculous, like something you'd hear in a thriller movie, but the way people kept mistaking me for someone else made it impossible to ignore. I didn't tell anyone what I suspected because even saying it out loud felt unhinged. Still, I could feel the edges of reality shifting, the way truth sometimes hums quietly before revealing itself. I needed proof, not guesses, not assumptions, actual proof. So I decided to follow Marcus one night. I told him I was staying home to finish a work project, and he acted completely relaxed, almost relieved. That reaction alone made me even more suspicious. He left the apartment at exactly 7:18 p.m., wearing cologne he only put on when he was trying to impress someone. I waited 60 seconds, then grabbed my keys. I kept my distance, 2 or 3 cars behind him, terrified he'd spot me but more terrified of what he was going to do. After 20 minutes of weaving through the city, he pulled into the parking lot of a small, dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town. It wasn't a place we'd ever been to together. It wasn't a place I could imagine him choosing at all, which made me certain he wasn't there to relax or unwind. He was meeting someone. I parked far enough away that he wouldn't notice me and watched him get out of the car. He checked his phone, did that nervous hair adjustment he always did before seeing someone important, then walked inside. My heart pulsed so violently in my chest that I had to sit there for several minutes before I could move. When I finally stepped out of the car, the cold air hit me so sharply it felt like it split my ribs open. I walked toward the bar with a feeling I can only describe as dread wrapped in adrenaline. The closer I got, the stronger the perfume scent became. It wasn't the same one from before. This one was sweeter, almost artificial. I hesitated at the door, fighting the urge to turn around and run, to stop before whatever truth waited inside could destroy my life. But I pushed through anyway. The bar was surprisingly crowded, filled with low lighting and quiet chatter, so at first I couldn't see where Marcus had gone. I scanned the room, my eyes darting from table to table, until they landed on the back corner. My breath stopped. There he was. And he wasn't alone. He was sitting across from a woman. But not just any woman. Not someone unfamiliar. Not someone random. It was me. Or at least, that's what it felt like in the first horrifying second when my brain refused to process anything else. Because she looked like me. Not just similar. Not just close. She looked like someone had taken my face, softened it, sharpened it, altered it but kept the core intact. Her hair was the same shade. Her skin tone the same. Her smile. Her posture, even her nervous habit of tucking hair behind her ear. She was like an alternate version of me, one that Marcus couldn't stop staring at. They were leaning in close, his hand grazing hers in a way that made my stomach twist. She tilted her head and laughed a laugh that sounded frighteningly similar to mine. The moment was so surreal I thought I might actually be hallucinating. For a few seconds I believed I was losing my mind. That stress had finally cracked me open and created illusions that weren't real. But then Marcus reached across the table, brushed her cheek, and said something that made her blush, and that was when I knew I wasn't imagining anything. He was cheating on me with someone who looked uncannily, disturbingly like me. I backed away so quickly I nearly tripped over a bar stool. My heart hammered in my chest so hard it made my vision pulse. I bolted for the exit, sucking in cold air as soon as I hit the parking lot. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, gripping the sides of my car, staring at my own trembling reflection in the window. Because what kind of person chooses a duplicate of their partner? What did it mean? Was she a backup version of me? A fantasy version? Was he comparing us the whole time? Was I the original? Or was I the copy? By the time I got home, I felt disconnected from my body. Every time I moved, it felt like I was watching myself from 3 steps to the left. I couldn't understand how he could look at her, someone who resembled me so strongly, and not feel sick with guilt. Or maybe he did. Maybe that's why he kept staring at me like he was analyzing something. Maybe he was comparing us. inspecting us, measuring the gaps. I barely slept that night. When Marcus finally came home hours later, smelling like that same artificial sweetness, he climbed into bed and wrapped his arm around me like nothing was wrong, like he wasn't just out with my near-identical clone. I lay completely still, feeling his breath on the back of my neck like a lie I couldn't get away from. The next morning, I expected him to be different, to slip up, to act strange, to reveal something in his behavior, but he was perfectly normal, cheerful. Even, he made breakfast, kissed me on the forehead, complimented my outfit, and the whole time I felt this suffocating pressure inside my chest because nothing about his actions matched the reality I had witnessed the night before. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Not without knowing who she was and how long this had been going on. I needed details. I needed the truth. My truth. So I did the one thing I never thought I'd do. I found a way into his phone. He never changed the passcode. It had always been the same. He just never expected I would try it. When he was in the shower, I slipped the phone from his jacket and opened it with shaking hands. My finger hovered over his messages for a long moment before I tapped the thread labeled with my initials, the one I'd seen before. And the moment it opened, everything I thought I understood about the situation shifted violently. Because the name wasn't my initials at all. It was her initials. She had my first name, my exact first name, and a different last name, and the messages between them stretched back for months. My legs nearly gave out. He wasn't just cheating with someone who looked like me. He was cheating with someone who shared my name, someone who resembled me so closely she could pass for my twin, someone he called the other version, someone he referred to as the upgrade. I stared at the screen, the words blurring as shock and rage and disbelief twisted together inside me. And that's when it hit me. He didn't just choose someone similar. He chose someone he believed was a better version of me. And I knew then that the truth was going to be even darker than I imagined. Because nobody finds a replica by accident. I couldn't stop reading the messages, even though every word felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. Marcus and the other me talked in a language that was almost intimate, almost ritualistic. He described moments from our relationship to her, retelling stories he had shared with me, but adding little details. Little enhancements that made me sound like a version of myself I didn't recognize. He called her my twin, my alternate, and even worse, he called her perfect. Perfect. I could feel bile rising in my throat as I scrolled. They planned meetings with meticulous care, coded conversations to avoid suspicion, and shared pictures he sent of me of us together as if she needed to study them. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a random affair. This wasn't a momentary lapse of judgment. Marcus had orchestrated a relationship with a duplicate. He was curating a version of me that he could control, mold, and ultimately replace. The thought made my hands shake so violently I had to set the phone down. I didn't sleep that night, and when morning came, I felt like a stranger in my own skin. The world had shifted, and there was no turning back. I knew I had to see her. I had to confront her. I had to understand how far this had gone and what Marcus had done behind my back. The next weekend, I somehow traced her to a small apartment in the next town over. I don't know why I wasn't scared. Or maybe I was, but adrenaline carried me forward. When I arrived, I didn't knock. I stood outside the door, looking through the small peephole, and what I saw made me freeze. She was sitting on the couch, flipping through a photo album, and in that album were pictures of me. Pictures he had taken secretly over months. Close-ups of my face, my hands, the curve of my shoulders, my laugh frozen in images I hadn't even realized were being captured. She had them all. She touched them softly, smiling like she understood things no one else could. She looked up suddenly, and for a moment, I thought she had sensed me. But then she went back to the album. The eerie calm in her demeanor sent chills down my spine. She wasn't frightened. She wasn't defensive. She was almost proud. I knocked. She didn't answer at first, so I knocked again, harder. Her head tilted slightly, but she still didn't move. I knocked a third time, this time with enough force to make her finally stand. When she opened the door, our eyes met, and I felt like I was staring at a mirror. My own reflection, but slightly altered, the same shape, the same features, the same eyes staring back at me. She smiled. It wasn't mocking, but it was knowing. She stepped aside and said nothing. I entered the apartment cautiously, my mind racing. Every object inside looked familiar, like a distorted version of my own home. There were frames with photos of her, not me, but with poses and expressions that I had used in my own life. Every detail screamed obsession. I demanded answers. She didn't flinch. She told me her name was Caroline, but she didn't correct me when I said it was the same as mine. She said she and Marcus had met online first, but it had quickly escalated to meeting in person. She claimed she never intended to hurt me, that she only wanted to be the version of me that Marcus loved more, that she wanted to be the girl he thought he couldn't have. Her words were smooth, rehearsed, terrifying in their calmness. I asked her why. Why me? Why my face? Why my name? She smiled like she had been waiting for this question her whole life. She said it was easy. I existed. She just copied me. The way she said it, as if it were simple, normal, sent a shiver down my spine. And then, she did something that broke something inside me. She pulled out a mirror from the counter and handed it to me. I looked into it, and for the first time in weeks, I felt physically sick. It wasn't just that she looked like me. She had learned my expressions, my gestures, even the subtle quirks I thought were invisible to anyone else. Every twitch, every glance, every way I tilted my head or smiled, she had perfected it. I felt violated in a way I couldn't articulate. My entire sense of self felt hollowed out, replaced by this presence. And the thought that Marcus could look at both of us, the real me and this living replica, and choose to be with her made my stomach drop into some empty abyss. I had to leave, had to run, but I couldn't. Part of me was frozen, paralyzed by a mix of fear, anger, and awe. Caroline stepped closer, her movements uncanny, almost ritualistic. She said she had been training, observing, studying. Marcus wanted me, but she wanted him more, and she was going to be perfect at it. My chest tightened as I realized she didn't see me as a person. I wasn't a girlfriend. I wasn't a human being. I was a blueprint, a guide, a reference point to help her become the woman Marcus wanted. And then she said something that made my entire world shatter. She whispered that Marcus had told her everything about me, my childhood, my habits, the way I liked coffee, how I laughed, how I cried. He had given her access to the most intimate parts of me without hesitation. He was grooming her to replace me entirely. The truth hit me like ice water in my veins. The betrayal wasn't just sexual. It wasn't even emotional. It was existential. Marcus had been slowly erasing me in favor of someone he could control, someone who could mirror me without question. My legs gave out, and I stumbled to the couch, clutching my head. Caroline didn't move. She just watched, eyes calm, almost admiring. I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. My throat was raw. My entire body was trembling. Not just with fear, but with rage. And then I realized I had a choice. I could let this break me. I could let Marcus and Caroline erase my existence. Or I could fight back. But fighting back meant exposing them both, revealing the twisted double life Marcus had built. And it meant confronting a truth I wasn't sure I could survive emotionally. That the person I love had chosen to replace me with someone who looked like me, who even had my name. The storm inside me was growing, a mix of fear, grief, and determination. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I had to act. But first, I had to understand the full extent of their deception, to know how long this had been going on and how much of my life had already been stolen. I left Caroline's apartment that night, but I didn't drive home. I sat in my car for hours, planning, calculating, trying to map every lie, every secret, every hidden corner of Marcus's life that I could expose. And in that darkness, I made a vow. I wouldn't just survive this. I would turn the tables. I would reclaim my life, even if it meant destroying the illusion Marcus and Caroline had built. Because what they didn't understand was that while you can copy a face, mimic gestures, and memorize words, you can't copy a soul. And my soul was far from done fighting. The next few days were a blur of planning and quiet observation. I couldn't risk Marcus noticing my behavior had changed. So I returned to my routine, keeping a calm facade while my mind spun with strategies. I scoured his habits, revisited old conversations, replayed the moments I had dismissed as coincidences, and slowly started mapping the truth. Every lie he had told, every discrepancy in his story, every subtle glance and comment that didn't belong, they all lined up like pieces in a puzzle that revealed a horrifying image. I discovered that Marcus and Caroline had been meticulous in keeping their worlds separate. But even perfection has cracks. I followed him one afternoon, keeping a careful distance, watching as he drove to a quiet suburban neighborhood where I knew Caroline lived. From the shadows, I could see the way he smiled at her, the same smile he reserved for her alone. I felt a cold, burning rage that threatened to consume me. That night, I started gathering evidence. I downloaded pictures from his cloud account, tracked dates of his excursions, and saved messages that confirmed everything I feared. I needed undeniable proof not just for myself, but for the confrontation I knew I couldn't avoid. The deeper I dug, the more twisted the pattern became. There were dozens of subtle ways Marcus had integrated Caroline into my life without my noticing. He had given her gifts he knew I would love, told her stories from our private moments, and even subtly encouraged her to mimic my wardrobe, my hairstyle, and my routines. It was methodical, chilling. He wasn't just cheating. He was curating a version of me he could mold to his desires. I realized then that confronting Caroline alone wasn't enough. Marcus had to understand that I knew that he couldn't manipulate or gaslight me anymore. The next encounter had to be carefully orchestrated. I began planning it with military precision, considering every angle, every possible reaction. I thought about recording a confrontation, gathering witnesses, and even confronting them in a public space to prevent lies and excuses. But I also had a more private desire. I wanted to see them confronted by their own guilt. I wanted Marcus to see me, not just me, but me fully aware, fully alive, and fully enraged. I started by creating a false narrative. I called Caroline under the guise of being concerned, asking to meet in a neutral location to talk things out. She was calm and suspecting, agreeing immediately. I knew she wouldn't suspect anything because, from her perspective, our lives were perfectly separate. Marcus had convinced her that I was oblivious, that I wouldn't interfere. On the day of the meeting, I arrived early. I wore clothes that Caroline would recognize as my style, scents that Marcus associated with me, and a confidence that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. When she arrived, the moment our eyes met, I felt the power shift. She realized immediately that something was off. There was an intensity in my gaze she hadn't seen before. The calmness in her demeanor faltered. I stayed poised, letting her anxiety rise with every second of silence. Then I revealed everything I knew: the messages, the pictures, the coded conversations, the excursions, the secret gifts. I watched her expression change from confusion to realization, the same way it had when I first discovered her existence. But the real shock came when I sent Marcus a single message. I didn't confront him in person yet. I just sent him a simple, chilling line. "I know everything. Meet me at the pier in 1 hour." He responded almost instantly. "What do you mean?" I didn't answer. I just waited. The pier was deserted when he arrived, the fog rolling in over the water making the air feel surreal. He walked toward me, confident at first, until he saw the evidence spread across the dock: messages, pictures, gifts, and the unmistakable documentation of his double life. I could see his confidence crack, the mask of charm slipping. For the first time in months, he looked at me not as a girlfriend or a possession, but as a threat he couldn't control. And for Caroline, when I brought her to the pier, the reality hit her harder than anything I could have said. The perfectly curated life Marcus had built for her collapsed in seconds. She wasn't the upgrade. She wasn't special. She was just a copy, a puppet in Marcus's deranged fantasy. Seeing the two of them together, stripped of control, stripped of their games, I felt a strange sense of justice. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't happiness. It was reclamation. My life had been violated, manipulated, and stolen. But finally, I had the power to reclaim it. I didn't humiliate them. I didn't yell or scream. I presented the truth, and I let the weight of their own actions do the rest. I left the pier that night feeling something I hadn't felt in months: clarity. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was awake, aware, and stronger than I had ever been. Marcus tried to reach out after that, apologies spilling out of texts and calls, but I ignored them all. Caroline tried to explain herself, to beg for forgiveness, but I refused to let her manipulate me with her calm, knowing smile. My heart ached for what had been lost: the trust, the love, the time, but it didn't break me. And in the silence of my apartment that night, I finally allowed myself to breathe, to feel whole, to remember that no one could ever truly replace me. Not Marcus, not Caroline, no one. Because no one could replicate the essence of who I was. And that truth, the core of my being, remained untouchable. The experience left scars, yes, but it also left lessons. It taught me to trust my instincts, to notice the subtle warnings, to understand the danger of duplicity in those closest to you. Most importantly, it taught me that even in the most surreal, painful betrayals, you could reclaim your power, and that sometimes facing the mirror wasn't about seeing a reflection of yourself, but about confronting the distortions others tried to impose upon you and refusing to let them define your reality. Even after the confrontation at the pier, the aftermath wasn't simple or clean. Life had shifted irreversibly, and Marcus's absence left a void that echoed in every familiar space. I had to rebuild not just my trust in others, but my trust in myself. The betrayal had been intimate and precise, like a surgeon removing the marrow of my life. And yet, paradoxically, it gave me something I hadn't expected: perspective. I spent weeks sorting through the digital evidence, cataloging every interaction, every lie, every subtle manipulation, and storing it safely, not out of vengeance, but as a recorded reminder that I had survived something surreal. A betrayal so layered and unnerving that it could have erased me. I changed my routines, not out of fear, but to reclaim autonomy. Every familiar path, every familiar object became mine again, not a reminder of their games. I began journaling obsessively, documenting my thoughts, my moods, my observations. Writing became a way to reclaim my identity, to anchor myself in the reality of my own experience, encrypted by Marcus's duplicity or Caroline's mimicry. There were nights when the memory of that mirrored face haunted me, not just Caroline's, but my own reflection, as if my mind was testing me, questioning whether the person I saw in the mirror was still me or a shadow shaped by betrayal. But I learned to recognize the difference. The reflection is only a surface. What lives beneath is impervious to replicas. Slowly, I started venturing out, reclaiming the social spaces that had felt poisoned. Friends and coworkers noticed a difference, a new confidence, a sharpened edge in my demeanor. I didn't tell them the full story, only fragments, carefully curated, enough to explain my guardedness without exposing the surreal details. The healing process was non-linear, filled with moments of self-doubt and rage. Sometimes I would replay Marcus and Caroline's faces, imagining the way they had manipulated themselves into my life, and the anger would surge, visceral and raw. But I used it. The energy fueled me, sharpened my instincts, strengthened my boundaries. It was a constant reminder no one should ever have that power over you. Eventually, life began to normalize. I returned to routines I loved: workouts, work projects, quiet coffee shop mornings. But everything carried a subtle vigilance. I had learned to notice the imperceptible shifts, the micro-expressions, the incongruities that used to escape me. Marcus tried reaching out intermittently. Messages, missed calls, even one attempt at showing up at my apartment. I didn't respond. I didn't need closure from someone who had meticulously dissected my life to suit his obsession. Caroline tried to contact me as well, initially claiming innocence, later feigning guilt, and finally resorting to threats when she realized the power she thought she held was gone. I ignored her too. Silence was the weapon I chose. And over time, the panic, the dread, and the terror of seeing a duplicate of myself faded, replaced by a quiet confidence that no replication could ever touch. Months later, I went to the bar where I had first seen them together. I didn't go to confront or to relive the trauma, but to reclaim the space as my own. The memories were still there, like ghosts lingering in the corners, but I refused to let them dictate my reality. I felt a strange sense of closure. I had witnessed the betrayal in full. I had seen Marcus's duplicity and Caroline's eerie mimicry. I had confronted it, documented it, and walked away intact. Not untouched, but unbroken. And that was the ultimate victory. Life resumed, not perfectly, not as it had been before, but with a sharper edge, a keener awareness, and a sense of autonomy I had never fully possessed before. The experience taught me that some betrayals are designed to dismantle your sense of self entirely. But even then, the essence of a person, the true core that makes them who they are, is impossible to replicate or destroy. I learned to trust my instincts above all else, to honor the subtle warnings, and to recognize that sometimes the greatest acts of self-preservation are not confrontations, but the quiet reclamation of your own life. Marcus and Caroline became distant, eventually irrelevant figures in my story. I no longer wasted energy on imagining their lives or their schemes. My life became mine again, a space untouched by their twisted duplicity. And in that space, I discovered something more profound than revenge, more satisfying than closure, the unwavering knowledge that no one can ever take the real you away. And that surviving the surreal, the manipulative, and the meticulously planned betrayal forged a resilience that nothing could match. I faced the reflection of betrayal, stared it down, and emerged stronger, fully present in my own skin. They had tried to replace me, mimic me, steal my life, but in the end, the only person who could truly be me was me. And that realization, as raw and terrifying as the journey had been, became the most liberating moment of all.